Hello, Luke. Welcome to lesson 100. So today we're going to be talking about a pretty simple concept. We'll be talking about rounding numbers, which is something that you've probably learned how to do a long time ago. But we don't want to assume anything here. We're just going to get through it and count it as an easy lesson today if you recall how to do this from previous years. So when we round numbers, the first thing that we really need to go over is just a refresher on our houses, right? So you learned this all the way back in grade school when you were talking about numbers. You learned houses, right? So you have your decimal point. We're going to put our decimal point right here. Okay, so there is our decimal point. The first house, you might say, to the left of the decimal point is what? Should be easy. It's the ones house, right? And then the house to the left of that is the tens house. And then to the left of that is the hundreds house, right? And we could keep going. And actually, you know what? I think I'm going to write these a little bit differently. Let's put these actually in a spot that's a little bit nicer. So let's correct this. We'll put the decimal inside. There's our decimal right here. And then this house is the ones house. And then we have the tens house, and then we have the 100s house, and then we have the 1000s house, and then of course what comes next? Do you recall? It's the 10,000s house. Remember, we kind of get going into this pattern of 1, 10, 100, right? So 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. And we repeat the pattern all over with the millions. So we go 1 million, right? And then 10 million. Not going to have enough room for all these zeros. And then we have 100 million, right? Okay, you get the general idea. So those are the houses to the left of our decimal point, and then we have the houses to the right of our decimal point. So the interesting thing here is there is no once house. So recall, whenever we move into the right side of the decimal, everything kind of ends with a th. Instead of having, the tens house, we have the, it turns into the tenths house with a th at the end, right? Hundreds house, well, that becomes the hundredths house. Excuse me. Right? So we have all these THs, THS at the end of the houses to the right of our decimal point. And the one thing to remember is that there is no once house, okay? When we move to the right to the decimal point, we jump right into the tens. All right? It's a little bit different than the houses to the left. So this would be our tenths house. Otherwise, if we want to write it as a fraction, it would be the 1/10ths house. Okay? The next house would be the 1/100ths house and the 1/1000ths house. And at this point, everything is exactly similar to the other side, except for it's a fraction. So we have now the 1 over the 10,000ths house, and then the 1 over the 100,000ths house, right? So this would just continue. We would continue that pattern of 1, 10, 100. So 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion, 10 billion, 100 billion. And all of those would have a THS on the end. So it would be 1 millionths, 10 millionths, 100 millionths, billionths. Okay? So this is just a very, very simple refresher on how the houses work and their positions. Okay? All right, so let's talk about rounding now that we've gotten through the basics here. So if I want to round a number, how do I do so? So if I have something that's, maybe really big and nasty, right? Something that looks like this, and I ask you to round it to the nearest tenths house. How do we go about doing that? Well, the first step is always to find the house in question. So if I say round, let's make sure I know how to spell round, round to the tenths house. All right. And so the first step is always to find the house in question. So we're looking at the tenths house. So let's just find that. Here's our decimal point. Where's our tenths house? Well, it's the next number, right? It's this one right here. That is the number in question. And if we're trying to round to the 10th house, well, that means everything after that 10th house, we want to turn that into a 0. Everything to the right, we want it just to go away. We just want to drop it, is really what we're trying to do. But before we drop it, we need to look at this very next number. Okay, we're looking at the next number right next to the house in question. And we need to ask ourselves, would it be better just to drop everything and leave this as what it is, 0.1? Or would it be best to maybe increase this 1 to a 2? All right, and to decide that, we look at this next number and we ask ourselves, is it 5 or greater? And if it's 5 or greater, then we increase the digit in the house. Okay. If it's less than 5, then we just leave the digit alone. Pretty basic stuff. I'm sure you've done this before. Okay, so we look at this next house, and it's a 2. And a 2 is less than 5. So therefore, we leave the house in question, the 1, we leave that alone. And everything else, we just drop it. It all becomes zeros. And when you have zeros after, the last digit in your decimal, the zeros can be dropped. Right? So technically, we're not, I guess, really dropping them, but we're changing them all to zeros. And when we change them all to zeros, when we're talking decimal positions, it's the equivalent of dropping them. Because they're meaningless at the end of a decimal. So this number rounded to the 10th house would be 6834837.1. Oops, 0.1. Which would be what if I place my commas? 6,834,837 and 1/10. Okay, that is rounded to the 10th house. It's as easy as that. So let's just do a couple of these practice shots here. We won't spend too much time on it, and just make sure that you're not, missing any small part here, and then we'll be ready for our seat work today. So let's take this first one. They want it to round to the nearest 10,000th. Go ahead and pause the video, round that number, and then we'll do it together and make sure you did it right. All right, so again, the first step is to find the house in question, and that house is the 10,000th house. All right, so let's go through. We find our decimal. This is our 10th house. This is hundredths house. This is 1,000th house. This is 10,000th house. So this is the number in question, the 3. All right, so to decide what we do next, we go to the next digit. It's a 4. It's under 5. So therefore, these become zeros, which means that we can drop them. And our final rounded number is going to be what am I doing here? 545. Let's write the number down right here. 0.2343. All right, 2,343 10,000ths. Okay, so that would be our rounded number. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So they want you to round to the nearest 10,000 now. Notice you really got to watch out for these THs. This is a 10,000th. This one does not have a TH, so we know we're to the left of the decimal. So go ahead and try this one on your own, and then we'll do it together. All right, so to the nearest 10,000ths, where's the house? Well, we have the ones, tens, hundreds, 1,000s, 10,000s. So this right here is our 10,000s house. So what are we going to do? We're going to look at the number next to it, which is the 5. And being that it's a 5, remember our rule. If it's 5 or more, we increase our house digit, our 4 here. So it is a 5, so we're going to increase the 4. So we have 1, 2, 0, 5. That 4 goes up to a 5. And then this is a little bit different now because we're not in the decimal houses. We change all of these to zeros. So all of those change to zeros. That's 4 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4. And here we can't just drop them because when we're to the left of the decimal point, these zeros actually do have meaning. They have a lot of meaning. If I were to just drop them, I'd have the number 1,205. But if I keep them, I have a number much bigger than that. I have 12,050,000. So obviously we can't just drop the zeros here. But we can drop these zeros because they're to the right of the decimal. So these would become zeros. And of course, if I were to write that out, it would be this. But you can see how these zeros have no meaning because they're to the right of the decimal and they're at the end. So those can just go away. And this is what we have for our rounded number. Okay? All right. Let's try this one. Round to the nearest 100 millionth. So go ahead and pause the video and do it by yourself. All right, so the nearest 100 millionth. Now again, we have the TH, so we know that we are on the right-hand side, the decimal part of the number. So we got to find the 100 millionth. So we have the tenths, the hundredths, the 1,000ths, the 10,000ths, the 100,000ths, the 1 millionth, the 10 millionth, and the 100 millionth. That would be this 8 right here, right? So now we found the house in question. That's most of the battle right there. And now we look at the next number. The next number is a 7, which is greater than 5. So we're going to increase our digit here from an 8 to a 9. And then everything after this is going to become a 0, right? But because we're to the right of the decimal point, those zeros don't mean anything. So now we can just rewrite the rest of the number here. This big, long, and nasty number. 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, there we go. So that is our rounded number to the 100 millionth. Okay? Now, sometimes they won't give you the house, the name of the house. Instead, it's often much easier to just give you how many decimal places they want. So they might say something that says round to 6 decimal places. All right? So they're not giving you the name of the house. They're just telling you go to the 6th decimal place, and that's where you're going to round. So if we do that, we start at the decimal, and we go 6 places over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The house in question is this 8 right here. That's the 6th decimal place. And that's what we want to round. So to round that, we look at the next number, which is a 4, which is below a 5. So that means this 8 is not going to change. It's going to stay the same. And again, everything to the right becomes a 0. And because we're on this side of the decimal point, that 4 goes away. And we have a 3, 3, 2, 4 point. 2, 1, 3, 5, 9, 8. The 8 does not change in this case. All right? Excellent. All right, let's try this one. And actually, this one, I'm going to add something to it. This should have a bar across the top, just to spice things up here a little bit. So go ahead and how would you round this one? They want to round it to 3 decimal places. What would you do? Well, you might say, well, wait a minute, there's only 2 decimal places. How do I get to my 3rd decimal place if there's only 2? Well, you're right. They do only write 2. However, they have this bar here. And remember, that bar means repeating. So what we're really saying here is the number is 3432.21212121, and it's just going on and on forever and ever, just repeating that pattern of 212121. That's what this bar means. We're just repeating it over and over and over again. So because they want it to the 3 decimal places, well, then we could easily just write this out to however many decimal places we want, but we would need at least 4 so that we can round it. So I'm just going to write it out to the 4th one here because we need the 3rd one. That's the one they want us to round to. But then we also need the next one to determine whether or not that 3rd one will change. All right, so here we have 4 decimal places. The one in question, the decimal that we want, is the 3rd decimal place, so that's this one. So what happens with this one? Well, the 1 is less than 5. So this 2 is going to stay the same. because this 1 is less than 5, and the 1 is going to disappear and become a 0. Okay, so we end up with 3432.212. The 2 does not change because the next number was less than 5. All right, and as I'm thinking about this here, maybe I'll just give you one more. Make sure that you've got this, because I guess maybe this would be one thing that can kind of throw some people off. What happens if I have the number 3.4679998? Okay, and I want you to round this to, let's say 6 decimal places. Okay. All right, why don't you try that one? Give this one a try on your own. See if it trips you up. And if it doesn't trip you up, that's great. Then you got it. If it does trip you up, well, this is probably as complicated as it's going to get, and we can go over it together. All right, so what did you do? Did you do it right, or did you get lost? So they want you to round to 6 decimal places. Let's find the 6th decimal place. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the decimal place in question. And we go to the next one and we say, is this greater than 5? And indeed it is greater than 5. Therefore, this 9 is going to increase by 1, right? That's the rule. It should go up by 1. But it can't. How can a 9 go up to 10? We can't put 2 digits into one house. Each house only has enough room for 1 digit. All right, so what happens? Well, what happens is this 9 goes up to a 0. All right, goes up to the next 0. But what about that 1? Because remember, if I think about this as going up to a 10, right? Well, the 0 is the one that stays in this 9's house. But this 1 from the 10, ugh, it's a terrible drawing. This 1 from the 10, it gets carried over into the next house. Okay? And so what happens here? This 9, we combine it with this 1. All right? But that produces another 10. So now we have another 10. That 0 is going to stay in this house. And that 1 again has to be brought over to the next house. Okay, so what happens here? Well, 9 and 1 is 10 again. So once again, we carry that 1 over to the next house. Okay, and finally, we're able to combine these two numbers, 1 and 7, and that'll give us an 8, which is good because it doesn't carry over into the next house. Okay, so we end up with a number that's actually much different than you might have expected. All right, now if they were strict and they really wanted it to the 6 decimal places, you would say that, okay, well, then you wanted 6 decimal places, so I'm going to give you 6 decimal places. This one has 3 plus another 3, that's 6. That's 6 decimal places. However, hopefully you can see that this number is actually no different than the number 3.468. Okay, and that would be an acceptable round in this case. It's not really to 6 decimal places because the other 3 are invisible, but it is. It is. It's just those 3 are invisible. Okay? All right, so that's probably about as tricky as it's going to be. You just have to remember, if you're rounding and the 9 has to be increased, well, the 9 changes to a 0 and the 1 gets carried over to the other house where it gets added to that house. In this case, this was like, you know, the perfect storm because the next house was a 9. And so that 1 overflowed that house and it went to the next house and that house overflowed and it had to go to the next house. And you would just have to keep doing that until you find a house that's not going to overflow. All right? Very good. So I think that's as far as we need to go. Hopefully this was all review. You know, it may have even been a little boring for you if it was all review. But hey, it's an easy lesson for today. So we will stop here. Good luck on your seat work, and I will see you tomorrow.